Else.
Hello, and welcome to Something Rhymes with Purple, the award-winning podcast all about words and language that I, Gyles Brandreth, host with my friend and colleague Susie Dent. We've just celebrated our second birthday here on Purple, so we thought we'd take a look back over the last 12 months to bring you some highlights from the show. Remember, our full back catalogue is still available online, so if any of these clips whet your appetite for more word origins from the worlds of oceans, plants, doctors, pasta, furniture, or anything else mentioned, do go back and listen to the full episodes. As ever, if you want to send Susie and me a wordy question, or argue with us, or if you have a topic you'd like to discuss and want us to explore it further in a future episode, the address is simply purple@somethingelse.com. That's purple@somethingelse.com. Something else spelt without a G, just to be a bit different. On to the clips now. Back in April last year, Susie and I were trading proverbs when a certain historical admiral decided to look the other way. To turn a blind eye, I've always believed this is something to do with Admiral Lord Nelson, the man who stands atop that mighty column in Trafalgar Square, now deserted. Am I right?
Yes, you are right. I think it's quite well known, this one, but I love it because it's just so literal. I think I've talked before on our podcast about how I love those idioms which you think must be a metaphor, but actually began with really literal origins. This is one of them. So, of course, turning a blind eye we use as a figurative turn of phrase these days, but it does go back to Horatio Nelson, who of course, had one blind eye. And just to condense it really quickly, once during battle, the British forces signalled for him to stop attacking a fleet of Danish ships because surrender looked inevitable. He thought they still had a chance, so he held up a telescope to his blind eye and said, "I do not see the signal." So he persevered, he attacked, and was victorious. So his blind eye turned out to be extremely important.
Wonderful.
And I just love that.
And is he the Nelson of the Nelson touch? You've heard that expression.
Oh, I don't know. What's the Nelson touch?
Oh, having the Nelson touch.
Midas touch, but not Nelson touch.
Oh,
no.
Well,
what's that?
The Nelson touch means something rather special. Oh, you've got the Nelson touch.
Ooh.
Now,
Okay.
did you, when you were at school, play cricket, or have you played cricket since?
I used to play French cricket with a tennis racket, but I've never actually played cricket.
I've played cricket. They used to say Gyles scores really well, meaning that I would lie in the long grass keeping the score, which is how I know that a Nelson in cricket is a score of 111, 111, because at the end of his life, Admiral Lord Nelson allegedly had only one eye, one arm and one leg. 111.
Wow.
That's a Nelson for you. And sticking with the world of water, a life on the ocean wave, a life on the ocean wave. Okay. In our episode, by and large, Susie very kindly rattled off the peaceful, logical and ursine origins of the world's oceans. And you'll be relieved to know I'm not singing in this clip.
Oh, gosh, honestly, if we want to talk about nautical idioms and nautical vocabulary, we could genuinely be here for 24 hours at least, because English is awash, if you excuse the pun, with idioms and expressions from the high seas. So we'll only be able to even, you wouldn't scratch the surface of the ocean.
Should we not be saying dip a toe into the ocean rather than scratching the surface?
This podcast is going to be full of the most horrible mixed metaphors. But yes, let's do that because it's a brilliant subject.
Can we begin with the oceans? How many oceans are there and what are they called and why?
Shall I start with the word ocean because that's quite interesting.
Please.
Came from the ancient Greeks, and okeanos for them meant great river. I mean, it may even be older than the ancient Greeks, but they believed in an earth that was disc-shaped, and they saw the ocean as a single great river that ran around the whole of this giant landmass. And it was only much later that distinctions came to be made between the different bodies of water. Naming them it wasn't arbitrary, it was a really big symbolic thing, but it was kind of informed by lots of different impulses, if you like, whether they were cultural or even personal in one case. So yeah, do you want me to run you through them?
Please. Can we start with the Atlantic?
Atlantic,
All right.
yes. That was named after the Atlas mountain range in northern Africa. And of course, they in turn were named after the Titan who supported the heavens that you'll still see on the frontispiece of old atlases. Don't know if modern ones have them. I don't think they do.
So Atlas was a character in Greek mythology?
Greek mythology. And he held up the heavens. So you would find on the flyleaf of old atlases, my school atlas included, a picture of him holding up.
And he is a virtually naked person wearing a little loincloth who has got his arms in the air and he's supporting the globe.
Yes, remember I went to a convent, so, a little went a long way. So that's the Atlantic. The Indian Ocean is obviously just based on its topography, and India itself is named for the Indus River. What else have we got? Pacific. Pacific is lovely. I love this one. Have you heard of the Magellan Straits?
I have.
Yeah. Well, they were named after an explorer called Ferdinand Magellan.
Yeah. And apparently not all his sailors were.
Well, in around 1520, he was searching for a route through to the Spice Islands, because, of course, the Spice Islands were the source of all these wonderful exotic treasures that were being imported back to Europe. And he was to kind of found what became known as the Straits of Magellan, where he and his fleet, they experienced really unpredictable winds and currents. That wasn't easy. And then they passed into the open waters of, I think it was known at the time as the Sea of the South. But he was really struck by its serenity, really. And so it led him to name it Mar Pacifico, the Tranquil Sea. So Pacific is linked to pacifist. It means peaceful.
Lovely. What about the Arctic?
Arctic. Okay, this was named after the Great Bear, the Ursa Major. The Greek word for bear is Arctos, and Arctikos meant northern, or literally of the Great Bear. And so the Antarctic Ocean is the not bear, if you prefer.
And that is why teddy bear enthusiasts are called arctophiles.
Arctophiles, exactly.
Arcto means bear. And ant, what is the ant in Antarctic?
Opposite. So antipathy, antipodes, all of that means the opposite. So the Antarctic is opposite north or opposite bear. Make sense?
Yeah, I get it.
Good.
And what about ant and deck? Is that anything to do with them?
Ant stands opposite deck, of course.
Very good.
Mediterranean, that's the other one. Mediterranean means sea in the middle of the earth. So
Mediterranean.
Yes.
And do we know what the difference between a sea and an ocean is? Because the Mediterranean is a sea, isn't it? Not an ocean.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm going to look this up because I don't have a ready answer for that. So I'm looking the Oxford dictionaries now. And sea, it says the expanse of salt water that covers most of the Earth's surface and surrounds its land masses. And ocean, hear me tapping away, a very large expanse of sea, in particular each of the main areas into which the sea is divided geographically.
Well, so all the water is sea, but specifically there are oceans to designate where they are.
Exactly.
And some parts that are not as big as oceans are called seas. We got you there.
It's a specific designation, yes. Being out on the water for that long sure can build up an appetite. Food has been a big part of Purple in the last year, whether it's armies marching on their stomachs or Italian generals scoffing biscuits. But nothing is quite as bizarre as Gyles's own culinary tastes. Do you believe him?
My signature dish is baked beans on toast. And but during lockdown, I've tried to simplify. Also, I'm trying to lose weight, so I'm trying to cut back on the carbs. So I've abandoned the toast. And so I just have the baked beans heated in the microwave. But I'm thinking that's maybe an excessive use of electricity. So I'm just having cold baked beans. There's almost an erotic charge. Can I say it's so delicious? And because I can't stand the washing up, I'm eating now out of the tin.
No, I don't believe this for a second.
I'm eating the baked beans out of the tin.
Not believe
I'm
this.
using a fork or a spoon because I discovered you cut your lip if you try and drink them
this
straight.
This is rubbish.
It isn't rubbish.
This is rubbish, Purple people. Yeah, I don't believe
it. It isn't rubbish. Keep life simple. I'm getting back to basics. I do my other dish. I used to be, when I was a fish eater, I used to love a fish finger sandwich.
Oh, yeah.
2 slices of bread.
Mayonnaise.
Oh, no, butter.
Oh, garlic mayo. You need garlic mayo.
Oh.
How have we got onto this?
Because we are trying, because every novel, this is to help you with your novel. If you think it's getting a bit flat, put in an eating scene. That's what all the great novelists do. Put in describe the crumpets oozing with butter. Describe your tarragon chicken.
I've rediscovered crumpets, actually, this lockdown.
Yes.
Anyway.
There's not been much crumpet I can tell you in my life during lockdown. Never mind. It's all true, Susie. And there will be purple people out there screaming at their smart speakers in agreement. Wherever you are in the world, there are few culinary pleasures quite like some cold baked beans straight from the tin. Or can. Give it a go, and you can thank me later. But on leaving the kitchen in this same episode, we went on a lovely walk through the garden to have a good look in the borders.
Well, I thought I would start with flowers that are kind of shot with threads from mythology, because there are so many beautiful legends attached to the names of flowers. So the iris, for example, is a nod to the messenger of the gods, personified by a rainbow. But there's the hyacinth as well. Hyacinths are so highly scented, aren't they? Can be a bit cloying sometimes, but quite beautiful when they're fresh. And that also got a really darkly beautiful tale behind it. It goes back to Hyacinth, the handsome Spartan prince, who was lover of the god Apollo, son of Zeus. And he was so handsome, and he had many unsuccessful suitors, including the god of the south wind, Boreas, and Zephyrus, god of the west wind, who gave us Zephyr, of course, or Zephyr. But his star-crossed relationship with Apollo is the one that kind of really counts, and it had a tragic end because during a game of discus one day, Apollo threw the discus high into the clouds, and Hyacinth ran after it, probably hoping to impress him. And the spurned Zephyr, the god of the wind, blows the discus off course. In other accounts, it's a bit of a kind of unfortunate ricochet, but I think it was Ovid who thought this was a very deliberate action by the god of the wind. And anyway, the discus kills the young Spartan, leaving a grief-stricken Apollo behind. And it's said that from Hyacinth's blood, Apollo created the flower whose name we still know today, and inscribed upon its petals the lamentation, I, alas. And you can still see, if you look at the markings on a flower, you can still see, almost make out those words, which is just beautiful.
Hyacinth. So the original Hyacinth was a bloke. So poor old Hyacinth Bouquet, she's named after a bloke.
Yes, although it's funny because the Greeks associated the myth not so much with a hyacinth, but with a gladiolus, which also have really distinctive leafy markings. But anyway, it's just a beautiful story of a fallen hero. And it's a much better name than the more prosaic word, another name for the hyacinth. This is what we used to call it, crow-toe.
Goodness.
Can't really make any poem out of that, can you?
A crow-toe is a hyacinth. And you're telling us that Hyacinth, the flower, is named after this young Greek personage, the handsome Spartan prince who had a thing with Apollo. And it all went wrong. This could be why Oscar Wilde, who I'm thinking about this year because this is the 125th anniversary of his imprisonment in 1895, Oscar Wilde, in the letter he wrote in Reading jail, De Profundis, out of the depths, he wrote a letter to his erstwhile boyfriend, Lord Alfred Douglas, and he spoke about the relationship between Hyacinth and Apollo and likened his relationship, Oscar Wilde's relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas, to the relationship between Hyacinth and Apollo. And now you're telling me that this is a doomed relationship that ends in tragedy and blood being spilt.
Yeah.
Tout s'explique.
That makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Tout s'explique. Absolutely.
Very good.
And from the Greeks, we stay with the classics to remind ourselves of the lovely explanation behind that weird squiggle people use instead of writing and.
And people now use an ampersand instead of writing out the word and. Is that right? Isn't ampersand that funny eight-looking figure like an eight?
Yeah, it's like if you think of M&S, between M and S. I think there are M&S's in across the world now, so hopefully people know what we're talking about. The shop
It's a
name.
store. It's a store.
You will see the ampersand. And
why is it called an ampersand?
So the ampersand is lovely, actually, because it goes back to, I think, late 18th century when kids were learning their alphabet, and they'd hold up these they were called paddle books. So they were these basically arrangements of letters on this big tablet that would have a handle, and they'd hold the handle. The tablet would be covered with this kind of transparent horn of an animal. It was called a horn book, and they would learn their alphabet, have to recite it off by heart again and again. And at the end of their alphabet was the symbol we know today as the ampersand. But they would read it because they would just, they were probably really bored, and they would read it by rote, and it would go, and by itself is and, but they'd say this in Latin, which is per se, am per se and, am per se and, am per se and, am per se and that eventually became heard as ampersand.
Wow.
Yeah, ampersand.
That's amazing.
I know. It's interesting. But the symbol itself is based on the Roman shorthand symbol for the Latin et, and.
So there you go. Next time you're in M&S or B&Q, or for our American contingent, you're making a call on AT&T, you won't forget the and per se and. Obviously, there's been a lot of medical news over the past year, but in July, Gyles and I walked the halls of medical terminology to uncover the dark humour running through much of doctors' lingo.
When you were with them, because you spent time professionally with them when you were doing your thing on tribal language, how different groups have a way of speaking one to another, a kind of an inclusive way of talking so that they understand one another, and it's a way almost of keeping outsiders out. What did you learn from the doctors? How did they talk? Why was their speech different from that of other mortals?
I don't know if it's particularly different apart from the strain of dark humour that runs through everything. And, quite rightly so. And a lot of it is jokey. And, you only have to go online and you will find pages and pages and pages of silly acronyms for things that doctors use, many of which I think are apocryphal. But ones that I came up with were OAP for over anxious parent.
Ooh.
Definitely recognise that one. PADE, paid. I have actually seen that on a set of notes. Pissed and denies everything. And according to Phil Hammond, who regularly comes on Countdown, there's also teeth, TEETH, which means tried everything else, try homeopathy. But the people, they call themselves by different terms. And you can see this if you've ever read Adam Kay's brilliant This Is Gonna Hurt, you will hear some of these as well. So the bonehead is the orthopedist, otherwise known as an orthopod. You've got the fanny mechanic, who's the gynecologist.
Good grief.
The Lancelot, apparently one who drains abscesses, and are known in the US as a Pokemon. Then you've got millions of different versions of things like NFB, which is normal for Banbury, that kind of thing, depending on where you are. Shadow Gazer is a radiologist. The Rear Admiral is a proctologist. Bones and Groans is the general ward. The Stream Team, the urology department. And Ward X, rather darkly, is the morgue.
Don't.
Yeah, that's not where you want to go ever.
That is a bit grim. Good afternoon, Mr. Brandreth. I'm afraid your mother has been moved to Ward X. Oh, dear. dear.
And then you've got PFO, piston fell over. Smurf sign, a patient who goes blue. VIP, I've seen this one as well, very intoxicated person. That's quite a regular one, I think. Oh, and so it goes on. There's a lovely one, again, I don't know if this is true, but acute pneumoencephalopathy for an airhead.
I love it.
Their knowledge of medical terminology is second to none, but they clearly have to have this kind of shorthand in order to relay what type of patients we really are.
As always, we've received thousands of emails and tweets from the Purple people over the year, and we love answering as many of your questions as we can. So please do keep them coming to purple@somethingelse.com. Or you can find us on Twitter at GylesB1, or I am at Susie_Dent.
What is the origin of cockroach? What's the cock doing there? That's another Twitter query.
Yes, there is no cock in cockroach. This is one of the ones where we couldn't get our mouths around a foreign tongue. Remember the Jerusalem artichoke? That has nothing to do with Jerusalem and goes back to the French girasol, a sunflower, because the artichoke is in the sunflower family, because we couldn't pronounce girasol. We thought, it sounds a bit like Jerusalem. We'll call it that. And it's the same for the cockroach, because it comes from the Spanish cucaracha. My Spanish is not very good. Cucaracha. So Cucaracha. But because we couldn't pronounce that, and I've just given you ample illustration of that, we changed the spelling because it sounded a bit like cock and then roach. Even though roach is a freshwater fish and it doesn't look like a cock. Excuse me.
Well, there we are. You've led a fairly sheltered life.
I've not seen the right ones.
Right. The water has boiled, so I'd better get the pasta into the pot. But will I go for spaghetti, linguine, fusilli, or farfalle? What do they all mean? And am I pronouncing them correctly? Join me in just a few moments to find out. Oh, golly, would you pass me the Parmigiano? Or do I mean Parmesan? Oh, dear. This week, we've thrown open the archives to bring you some of the best bits of the show from the last 12 months. That break has given me just enough time to get my pasta cooked, because I like it al dente. Susie, have you any ideas on how I should serve it? Spaghetti.
Have you ever had spaghetti puttanesca?
No.
Spaghetti puttanesca is absolutely gorgeous as well. So this is a sauce with garlic, black olives. I'm not a huge anchovy fan, but you can put anchovies in there as well, and tomatoes. And it goes back to the Italian puttana, meaning prostitute. So it's linked to the French putain. And the sauce is said to have been created by prostitutes because it could be cooked very quickly between clients' visits. Spaghetti puttanesca. And it's interesting that there's so much of that kind of thing behind English words like fornicate. One theory is that it goes back to the Latin fornix, meaning oven. And it's said that prostitutes would gather at night by the ovens in ancient Rome in order to keep warm. And then, of course, that became linked to their trade and, you know, and fornication. But that's one theory. I mean, it's not completely, you know, set in stone. But yes, it's the idea of an arch, and the ovens were often arched and vaulted chambers, and then later that became associated with brothels. So there you go. Just thought I'd throw that one in.
But I think that's completely gripping. This is why I love this programme. I learn things. Fornication, it never occurred to me that it would be to do with ovens and in brothels and the poor prostitutes keeping themselves warm before they had their, what was it again that pasta was called?
Puttanesca.
Puttanesca. Puttanesca. Putta being prostitute, as in puta.
Yes, exactly.
Very good. Give me some other ones. What about, I tell you what I do like. I like linguini.
Yes. Oh, that's a nice one. Linguini means little tongues. So it's linked to linguist, language, all sorts.
Tagliatelle?
Tagliatelle means little strips. So tagliare in Italian is to cut. So it almost looks like you're cutting ribbons, doesn't it? And in fact, that's what fettuccine means. Fettuccine means little ribbons as well, which is quite cool. Farfalle, which is a favourite here as well. Farfalle, they look like little bow ties, don't they? But actually they are originally butterfly shaped. It goes back to the Italian for butterflies, farfalle.
Ah, what about fusilli?
Fusilli, those are the ones that look, they're slightly corkscrew shaped, and it goes back, we think, to the Italian fuso, meaning spindle, so little spindles is the idea there. Penne, which I think is probably the most popular pasta, isn't it? Penne goes back to penne, meaning feather, so little feathers, I think it is. And actually that then is related to the pen that we use to write things because, you know, of course they had quills, and also if you're pennate you have feathers, etc. So yeah, penna meant quill originally, or feather.
And penne is with two N's.
Penne is with two N's, so not like the pens that we write with. Gnocchi is a nice one. Do you like gnocchi? I discovered those when in Italy. You don't like them?
Gnocchi.
Okay.
Is that the one that's got, it isn't really a pasta, it's made of a different sort of potato?
Yeah, they're made from potato often, or semolina. So they are more dumplings.
Yeah.
And those go back, because if you think of their shape, it goes back to the Italian nocchio without the G, meaning a knot in wood. So, you know, you get those sort of whorls, WHORLS, in wood. Gnocchis are sort of slightly shaped like that, the knots that you would find in a grain of wood.
Baked beans is a yes and gnocchi is a no. Useful to know for the next time Gyles and I are able to record in the same location again, and it's my turn to cook lunch. Regular listeners will know that whatever the topic, Gyles has a word game or a quiz question up his sleeve just to keep me on my toes. And our sojourn around the streets of London was no different, especially when we arrived in Gyles's neck of the woods.
I love Chelsea. One of the parts of London I was brought up in was Chelsea.
Yeah.
Part of my love of Oscar Wilde comes from the fact that he lived in Chelsea, not far from us in Tite Street. I lived for a while in Oakley Street, opposite the house where Lady Wilde, Oscar Wilde's mother, lived. So I walked the streets of Chelsea as a child, and I used to get my hair cut at Harrods. There was a children's hairdressers at Harrods, next to, not the toy department, but to the zoo. Harrods had a zoo and pet shop in the
Seriously?
1950s. Seriously.
Wow.
And you would go in there and you'd get your hair cut, and then you'd go around and you'd meet the turtles and the monkeys and the snakes. Isn't that extraordinary?
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is, Harrods is near, and the tube station for it is Knightsbridge.
Yes.
Why is Knightsbridge a unique English place name?
Well, oh gosh, is this my quiz question?
That's your quiz question. And please, purple people, see if you can answer it before Susie Dent does. Knightsbridge. What is unique about the name Knightsbridge? Why is it the most remarkable name of any place in the English language? Knightsbridge. Just look at the word. Knightsbridge.
Don't know.
What's special about it? Let me reveal it.
Okay.
It's the one name that has in the middle of it 6 consecutive consonants.
Oh, of course.
Isn't that extraordinary? GHTSBR.
Oh, I love that. I know that the name is possibly based on the fact that there was a bridge there that may have been used by the knights and the ladies, the wealthy people, the aristocracy of London. That's one theory for it. But, that's a really good one, and I should know that as a linguist. Thank you for that. Can I tell you about Charing Cross?
Please.
Because we've mentioned Charing Cross before, I think, because it's just has such a lovely story, because Charing goes back to an Old English word meaning a turn or a bend, either referring to a bend in the River Thames at this point or the bend in the old Roman road that existed. But the cross refers to the Eleanor Cross erected here and in several other places, actually, by Edward I to commemorate his first wife, which was Eleanor of Castile, and her funeral procession went from cross to cross. So it's got a lovely story of love behind it, Charing Cross. Sorry, can you hear my radiators creak?
Yeah, it's your radiators, is it? I thought it was your brain slowly coming to life.
Yeah, or slowly going back to sleep again.
Am I right in thinking that people think that the centre of London is Charing Cross? So when you see a sign, when you're approaching London,
Yes.
On whatever motorway it is, and it says 7 miles to central London, it is 7 miles to Charing Cross.
Absolutely right. All distances calculated from there, which is nice.
Susie's radiators rudely creaking away in the background there. But that's been some of the joy of recording remotely at home during the lockdowns we've all been part of, wherever you are in the world. We've been heckled by posties knocking at the door, online grocery deliveries, cats on the keyboard, and even my wife doing what sounded like an Irish jig in clogs in the room above me. But it did get me wondering, where does the word heckle come from?
Did we ever talk about the origin of heckling?
No, I've been the victim of it in my time. I want to hear the origin.
It was really strange. It takes us back to the kind of legalisation of trade unions, I guess, in the early 19th century, when, growing numbers were joining the fight for better pay, better working conditions, etc. And a sort of unlikely byproduct of trade unionism is, in fact, heckling, because it's said to have originated with a particularly vociferous, vocal, shall we say, union in Scotland. And what happened there was a heckling shop. Now, a heckling shop was a place in the textile industry where knots and dirt would be removed from flax or hemp fibres. So this is before the process became mechanised. And a heckle, or a hackle as it was also called, was a steel comb used for smoothing out this knotted material. And one such heckling shop in the Scottish town of Dundee was incredibly ill ventilated, really unpleasant, back-breaking work. And in fact, Robert Burns was among those who carried out this hour upon hour of heckling in the establishment. And apparently by 1880, these people had had enough in the heckling shop, and they established a union to fight for better conditions. Using their strength in numbers, it said they did a fair amount of shouting, and it got a reputation for activism. And it's through that link with the heckling shop, where they were combing out textiles and fabric, and their kind of, shouting for better working conditions, that heckling transferred over into this idea of shouting and clamouring for their voices to be heard.
Whenever I wonder, will Gyles have an anecdote for this topic? The first phrase that often pops into my head is, well, is the Pope a Catholic? And in this clip, those two worlds collide. But you might not want to look up.
Litter is another one. Can you guess what word might be behind litter?
Litter. Well, I do know, having a love of carry-on films, one of my favourites is the one set in the French Revolution, where Kenneth Williams, I think, plays Le Grand Fromage, the big cheese. And I think he's brought on in a litter. It's a kind of like a sedan chair. Why is it called a sedan chair? You can tell me that, because it comes from Sedan, I suppose. You sit in a box.
It comes from sedere, to sit. So it simply goes back to that Latin root.
Fine. Yeah. So it's a chair, a sedan chair. You're sitting, well, it's actually tautological, isn't it? It's two words.
Lying on it, really. Yeah.
So you're sitting in a chair and you're carried in. And that was sometimes called a litter. The Pope, when he's crowned and comes into St. Peter's Square, he is carried on a litter, isn't he?
Yes.
Guys with big biceps have carrying him, and his chair is on top of a platform which is carried along. That is a litter.
Yeah, think of your French here, because it goes back to the French lit, meaning a bed. And it's actually a fairly sad story in that it looks back to people who couldn't afford proper beds, so would make them out of straw, paper, whatever they had handy. And that would be then discarded the following day because it would be considered soiled, which is where we get the idea of litter being rubbish. But ultimately, it goes back to that idea of a bed. And when we talk about a litter of puppies, it is the idea, again, of sort of lying down and, and just sort of curling up, I suppose, and then giving birth from that point of view. But it's all to do with lying down on beds.
So you're lying down on a bed, and when you were brought in on a litter, it meant you were like a kind of Roman emperor. You'd be lying back on your bed, and the bed would be carried into the room.
Yes.
And the litter on which the Pope sat or was carried in once he'd become Pope, the reason that I'm conscious of it is I do remember there was controversy hundreds of years ago when they thought they'd elected somebody who turned out to be a woman, Pope Joan. Do you know about this?
Wow.
There was briefly a pope called Pope Joan, and she was female, but she was actually elected Pope. So she must have been a cardinal, and they made her Pope. They didn't want this to happen again. And so what they did, whenever a new Pope was elected, and we're going back to pre-medieval times, they would put the Pope on the litter in his papal robes, and they would carry him in, so he was, as it were, above. He was being held up. And there would be a hole cut in the bottom of the litter, and the cardinals would walk underneath the papal litter and gaze upward at the Pope's nether regions to make sure that it wasn't a woman, that it was a man. And as they would go under, they would say, they would stop, they would gaze up, and they would say, in Latin, of course, testiculos habet et bene pendentes.
Oh, my goodness.
He's got them, and they're hanging nicely. And then they would walk on. And that's how they would know that the Pope was a bloke. And it was all thanks to the papal litter with a hole cut through the middle of it.
What an extraordinary story.
Anyway, that's the joy of language. It takes you to places that one would not think of.
Now Gyles is in full flow, it would be remiss of me to exclude from our best of episode one of the finest name drops in purple history, featuring old Blue Eyes himself.
Did I ever tell you about being in the wings at the Royal Albert Hall with Frank Sinatra? Does this ring a bell?
Remember. No.
Well, I was sent to interview Frank Sinatra on his last tour when he came to the Royal Albert Hall to sing. And he was quite an old man by then. And they explained to me, you're going to be talking to Mr. Sinatra after the show, but you can stand in the wings to see him go on. But you mustn't come within 10 metres of Mr. Sinatra. He concentrates before going on stage. So you can stand there, but don't go within 10 metres of him. Is that understood? So I stood in the wings, and Sinatra arrived in the wings, about to go on the stage. The orchestra was already playing the Come On music, and there was Frank Sinatra, looking exactly like Frank Sinatra. It was incredible. He was shorter, I suppose, than I imagined, a bit stockier, but it was Frank Sinatra. There was something electric about him. There was charisma.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is amazing. And then I realised that he didn't have any trousers on. He was standing there in his shirt, wearing a bow tie, but in his shirt, with boxer shorts, and I think what the Americans call suspenders, what we would call, they'd keep keeping his socks up.
Okay.
Sort of things to keep his socks up. So he was wearing
I know what you
shoes and socks. And
It's not a particularly sexy image.
exactly.
Exactly.
And, the music was playing, and he was moving towards the edge of the stage. I thought, this man's going to go onto the stage at the Royal Albert Hall, thousands of people there, and I'm the only person here in the wings. This poor man is going to go on the stage in his underpants. And I thought, well, maybe he's older than he's older than I. Oh, God, has he gone a bit? Has he lost it? Is this going to be the most humiliating moment in Frank Sinatra's life? And I thought, I cannot let this happen. And literally, as he was about to walk onto the stage, I'm afraid I decided I had to stop him. So I began to walk towards Frank Sinatra, ready, if necessary, to do a rugby dive to prevent him going onto that stage. And as I was about to throw myself upon him, two minders lifted me out of the way, and Frank Sinatra's dresser stepped towards him with trousers. He stepped into the trousers, he then put on the jacket, and he turned towards me, and he said to me, "Those guys out there have paid a lot of money to see me. I wear a new suit for every show I ever perform.
Wow.
They deserve the best. They paid for it. They're going to get it." And then he walked on. It was amazing.
I'm more impressed that anyone can actually put on a pair of trousers whilst wearing shoes.
You're right, Susie. And with all that dexterity, it's just a surprise he didn't record more soul music. Get it? Soul, S-O-L-E, as opposed to S-O-U-L. Forget it. That's nearly it from this rummage through the Purple archives. But before we go, here are 3 wonderful words to take with you this week. You heard them before, back in September. Can you remember any of them?
Okay, so if you were a thermopot, I don't know if you remember, I mentioned theist, which obviously means devoted to a god, but which has a secondary meaning of addicted to tea drinking, as used by Shelley of himself. If you were a thermopot, you were a drinker of hot drinks. So that one will encompass coffee drinkers as well, which I quite like.
Who don't want their coffee luke.
Exactly. Absolutely right. You were a thermopot then. So policitation.
Ooh.
This is Policitation. A policitation is an offer made but not yet accepted. So if you've invited your friends round and they might be waiting for a better offer, they have taken your policitation but haven't yet responded.
Oh, policitation. Very good.
Yes, I like that one. And okay, so then the other one. Remember in the last programme we talked about a lance corporal.
Yes.
And how it went back to someone who had worked so hard and who had seen such battle that their lance was broken and showed the life that they had led. Well, it does come from that, but the original word was a lans presado. So it's LANS Presado, a lans presado, which occurs in a 1736 dictionary of thieves' slang, where it's defined as he that comes into company with but 2 pence in his pocket. In other words, it's the person who turns up in the pub and accidentally has forgotten their wallet.
Oh, I love that.
A lans presado.
How do we spell it again?
LANS Presado.
I know quite a few of those. A lans presado.
Yes.
And there are certainly a couple of lans presados lurking in this list of credits I'm about to read out, because that's all we've got time for on this trip through the archives. Join us next week for more wordy wonders and confusing cliches, but until then, Something Rhymes with Purple is a Something Else production, produced by Lawrence Bassett with assistance from Steve Ackerman, Harriet Wells, Ella McLeod, and a man who made a lot of fans very happy by popping up on screens at our recent livestream event. Of course, it's Gully.